In our series, Teaching Slavery in America, we analyze the gaps in America's education system that have not allowed many of us to learn the full scope of America's history. In part two, we learned about the techniques one school district is using to adjust the curriculum it presents to students. Now let's shift from students to parents. I spoke with Harvard professor Khalil Gibran Muhammad about his experience when lessons about slavery were received negatively at his kid's school.
My daughter comes home one day from school and she's got a history assignment. Because I'm a historian, she made sure that she solicited my help. It was a focus on colonial America and the life and labor of people in a difficult environment.
Parents speaking out about a controversial homework assignment at an elementary school in New Jersey as part of a lesson in American history.
In a previous conversation that we had about this, you were honest about the fact that your reaction was different from other parents, especially Black parents.
It breaks my heart. That is how one person who saw the posters hanging during parent-teacher conferences described the feeling that, quote, these are the images that young Black and brown kids will see of people with their skin colors.
Can you explain why? What about it was not particularly bothersome for you?
Well, because I know for a fact that in our nation's classrooms, we do a very poor job teaching the contributions of African Americans and the story and role that they played in American history.
The whole Black history thing in schools to me is just crazy.
I think it should be a sad thing. They shouldn't be having fun making posters.
And so for me, any effort to try to integrate greater attention to African Americans as well as Latinx history and Indigenous history into our curriculums is a huge step in the right direction. But I also understood in many ways the level of mistrust that existed amongst parents who were suspicious of whether or not the school teachers were able to teach it effectively.
The South Orange Maplewood School District apologized, saying this assignment has been in place for a decade and it's an opportunity to examine the shameful and too often ignored chapter of American history.
I actually met with the teachers of my fifth grade daughter. I sat down with them. I asked them for the instructional lesson plan. I looked at the textbook they used. And contrary to most textbooks, this textbook actually did a pretty good job. And so I gained a bit of confidence in reviewing that material and having a conversation with them that this wasn't just a willy-nilly exercise in a kind of Black History Month show and tell.
For the second time in a month, outraged parents are forcing leaders at a local school district to take a close look at how slavery is being taught.
And there was another incident that happened at the school where kids were acting out a slave auction. It was the same school, correct?
No, it was not the same school. It was the same school district.
The same district.
Small community. So the school system is not very big.
There was a sale of a Black child by white children in the classroom. If you're demoralized, if you're sold on a block in 2017 in your fifth grade class, it may affect you for the rest of your life.
First thing to know is that the auctioneers, the enslavers versus the enslaved was a mixed bunch. Some Black people were participating in the auction, some Black people were being sold, vice versa for white folks. So it was a mix of students. The second thing is
the principal said the impromptu reenactment of a slave auction by students was done while the teacher was out for a medical procedure and a substitute was in charge of the class. The activity was not part of the curriculum, not part of the teacher's assignment, not condoned by the classroom teacher, and not authorized by the district.
a substitute was responding to the students, engaging in play. And the thing that we have to know if you're an educator is that children learn through play. I mean, with sensitive subjects, it can appear as an inappropriate form of learning, but historical reenactments are very common.
And what did it communicate to you that this project that you did with your daughter escalated to something that became newsworthy? What did that mean to you about how this issue is perceived in our country right now?
There needs to be more preparation in how we talk to parents about these kinds of sensitive issues that for parents themselves were not properly educated.
Not being properly educated is the reason we're here. It explains why a series like this one has to exist. So after speaking to Khalil about the parents' perspective, I spoke to him as a Harvard professor of history and race. I'm kind of wondering what ideas you have come across or thought of about how to make sure well-rounded curriculums end up in more schools.
The real problem won't be addressed by avoiding an effort to do this. The real problem will be addressed by bringing in more expertise, more thoughtful people, having rich conversations amongst adults in our communities, amongst parents and their children and their teachers, so that we can get this right.
And I want to talk about implementation. You explained to me that the issue is a little more complicated than just more states need to pass laws. That is part of it, but states are passing laws, but we talked about how it's kind of the enforcement that needs to be looked at. Is there a fix for that? How should that be approached?
It happened in New York, it happened in New Jersey, it happened in a few other places where they said, we're going to establish something called an Amistad Commission. And the Amistad Commission is going to develop curricular standards that will apply to the entire educational system in these states. And it will be a resource to social studies teachers and English teachers and all teachers who want to know how to teach a fuller, richer version of the American past. The problem is that the Amistad Commission did not have the teeth of enforcement till there is a legislative requirement that curriculum reflect the contributions of the Amistad curriculum. Nothing's going to change, or not enough will change, I should say.
How long could something like that take?
Well, like all legislation, you need leadership amongst the legislators to decide that they want to change the existing laws to something that is less advisory and more of regulation or requirement. It may be less about the legislative time that it takes to enact stiffer requirements than it does to make sure that the curriculum itself is rewritten to reflect those changes. So I think it's a both and. Both the state can do a better job of requiring it, but also school districts can do a better job based on school board leadership, based on administrative leadership, and based on parents pushing to simply adopt what already exists.
You're researching something very similar to this, not slavery specifically, but how race and anti-bias education is imperative in schools. What have you found about why that's the case?
Well, let me just say we haven't published any findings yet. I'm at the beginning of this process, so everything here is mostly speculative. But there's a lot of existing research that tells us that children at very young ages, in infancy, for example, are able to see physical differences between human beings. That means that children are not born racist, but it means that they see difference. And because we still live in a racist society, unless we teach them that that difference does not map onto a hierarchy of superior people and inferior people, that those are social constructs and cultural constructs, then children will begin to adopt the language and the cultural cues of our society. If we want children to contribute to an anti-racist society, to make healthy choices about how to treat other people who look different than you, or who speak differently than you, or who come from different parts of the world, then we actually have to teach our children that.
We'll conclude our series with part 4, discussing resources and next steps. I'll speak with the director of the Southern Poverty Law Center's Teaching Hard History Department. It provides teachers with resources and instructions on how to do everything that's been suggested in this series. That's in part 4 of our Newsy original series, Teaching Slavery in America.